The studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show chaos, producers shuffling papers, assistants whispering into earpieces, camera operators making last-minute adjustments. The air was thick with energy, a mix of excitement and tension, as the countdown to the live interview ticked away. At the centre of the stage sat Morgan Freeman, his presence as steady as the ticking clock. He didn't fidget, didn't check his watch, didn't glance around anxiously like so many others who sat in that chair. Instead, he exuded a quiet, unshakable confidence, the kind that comes from a life well lived, from experiences that had sculpted his wisdom into something tangible. Across from him sat Jessica Monroe, a rising star in American television. Young, ambitious, and relentlessly modern, she had built a career on sharp, provocative interviews. She didn't just ask questions, she framed them as verbal sparring matches, always seeking to corner her guests into sound bites that would set the internet on fire. Her audience didn't just tune in for conversations, they came for the spectacle. And today, she had set her sights on Morgan Freeman. The cameras rolled, the lights brightened. Jessica's signature smile, polished, rehearsed, and calculated, spread across her face as she leaned in. "Mr. Freeman," she began, her tone honeyed but laced with an unmistakable sharpness. "You've had an incredible career, decades in Hollywood, some of the most iconic roles in history. But with the industry evolving so fast, do you ever feel like maybe your time has passed? That audiences are moving on from actors of your generation?" The words were wrapped in politeness, but their undercurrent was unmistakable. The real question she was asking was, "Do you think you're too old to matter?" For a moment, the room seemed to still. Morgan didn't flinch. He didn't rush to respond. Instead, he let the question breathe, giving it space, something so few people did in the world of rapid-fire interviews. He tilted his head slightly, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. His eyes, wise and unyielding, settled on Jessica. "That's an interesting question," he finally said, his voice a smooth, deliberate rumble. "But let me ask you something in return." Jessica blinked, momentarily caught off guard. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. She was supposed to be in control. "When you read a book," Morgan continued, "do you skip to the last page because you think the story is no longer relevant, or do you read every chapter knowing that the final pages often hold the most wisdom?" Jessica hesitated, the confidence in her expression flickering ever so slightly. Morgan leaned back in his chair, his presence unshaken. "Relevance isn't about age. It's about impact, about what we leave behind. I tell stories not just for now, but for generations. And stories, they don't age." Jessica shifted in her chair, quickly regaining her composure. "But with the rise of younger actors and digital media, do you think today's generation even relates to the kind of films you've done?" Morgan chuckled. Not a dismissive laugh, but one that carried the weight of understanding. "You see," he said, "that's the mistake so many people make, thinking that relevance is tied to trends, to youth, to what's hot in the moment." He gestured subtly around the studio. "Do you know why certain films, certain voices, certain stories endure? Why people still watch movies made decades ago? Because true relevance isn't about being new, it's about meaning. When a story touches the human soul, it never grows old." Jessica's expression hardened slightly. She was used to guests fumbling, stammering, trying to defend themselves. Instead, Morgan was teaching, and worse for her, the audience was absorbing every word. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. "But don't you think Hollywood and society really focuses more on youth, on what's next, rather than what's been?" Morgan nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. "Yes, and that's exactly why experience is so valuable. Because in a world that's always looking forward, someone needs to remind them where they've been." He let the words settle. "Wisdom is the bridge between generations. The world will always chase the next big thing. But without perspective, without reflection, people repeat mistakes." That's where people like me and those older than me matter. Not because we demand attention, but because we hold the lessons people will one day realise they need. Jessica exhaled slowly. She wasn't used to losing control of the narrative. The audience wasn't laughing at a dramatic confrontation. They weren't gasping at a shocking revelation. They were listening. And that, Jessica realised, was far more dangerous to her style of journalism. Perhaps sensing her unease, Morgan leaned forward slightly, his tone as calm as ever. "You see, Miss Munro," he said gently, "the greatest mistake the young often make is believing that wisdom is something they're born with. It isn't. It's earned, one failure at a time, one triumph at a time, one lesson at a time." Jessica swallowed, her rehearsed persona cracking just slightly. Morgan continued, his voice softer now. "One day you'll be sitting where I am. Someone younger, someone eager to push forward, will sit where you are, and they'll ask you the same thing. Do you think your time has passed? And when that day comes, I hope you'll smile, because then you'll understand." Jessica, for the first time in her career, had no response. The interview ended with applause, not the artificial, forced kind that TV producers cue, but the genuine, thoughtful kind that lingers. Jessica's team quickly huddled around her, whispering strategies to spin the interview, but she barely heard them. Something about Morgan's words had stuck in her mind, unshakable. As for Morgan, he stood up with the same effortless grace he had when he entered. He had nothing to prove. The truth he had shared would outlive any headline, any viral clip. And that was the difference between fleeting relevance and true impact. This story isn't just about Morgan Freeman. It's about how society views age, wisdom, and relevance. Too often we equate value with youth, dismissing the voices of those who've lived long enough to understand the bigger picture. But in doing so, we risk losing the very lessons that could guide us forward. Morgan Freeman didn't need to argue his importance. He simply embodied it in his words, his presence, and his unwavering belief in the power of experience. So what do we truly take away from this story? Relevance isn't tied to the freshness of youth or the fleeting spotlight of fame. It's about impact. It's about the quiet legacy we build in the hearts and minds of those around us, leaving something far more valuable than trends, the mark of who we were, how we lived, and the lessons we shared. Wisdom, unlike popularity, doesn't dim with time. It deepens. Every year, every triumph, every heartbreak adds another layer, forming something more powerful than surface relevance, a foundation of insight and understanding that only life can give. The world moves faster than ever, urging us to chase the next big thing, to constantly reinvent ourselves. But the truth is, those who pause, who listen, who honour the wisdom of those who came before them, will always walk a path with deeper meaning. And perhaps the most profound lesson of all, one day each of us will stand where Morgan stood. When that moment comes, will we still be chasing relevance? Or will we finally understand that what truly matters is how we made others feel and how we made them think? If you enjoyed the story and found it meaningful, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps us reach more people. We'd also love to hear from you. Share your thoughts and the lessons you've learned in the comments below. Your insights could inspire someone